Hello and welcome back everyone to your final lesson in web development. We really have come a long way in this course, and today we're going to wrap up our final lesson by exploring frameworks for web development. Now the objectives for today's lesson is as follows. First, we'll have a look at the importance of frameworks in web development and discuss the advantages and the disadvantages of using frameworks in the development process. Then we'll move on to exploring some front-end web development frameworks and wrap things up by exploring some back-end frameworks. Now, even if you are just a novice web developer, I'm fairly certain that you must have come across the term web frameworks. So what exactly are they and how do we use them? Now, the best way to think about web development frameworks is that they are packaged libraries and tools for web developers. If you think about an electrical engineer or a mechanical engineer, for example, these individuals tend to have a toolbox filled with tools that they can actually use to expedite the engineering process. This is fairly similar when it comes to web development, in that you often have packaged libraries and tools that you can use to expedite the web development process. Frameworks also offer you management and build capabilities throughout the life cycle of the development process, and they often consist of predefined services that you can tap into as a web developer. Wonderful. Now with that said, what are some of the advantages of using frameworks? Well, first of all, and this is most likely the biggest advantage, is that using a web development framework often allows you rapid application development. Imagine you've got a small or a medium-sized project and you really want to get a prototype or a minimum viable product out there. Well, frameworks can really help you do this, especially because everything is already pre-packaged. So this essentially means that you really don't have to go and build everything from scratch. Frameworks also allow you to integrate existing services into your web application. If you are building a very simple application where you need to track user location, for example, you could easily use something like Google Maps API to tap into their service and use all the functionality available with that library. Another major advantage of using a framework in the web development process is that you tend to write less code, and this is because your code becomes more lean as a result of using predefined services and packages and libraries and so on. So this means that you don't have to write as much code to achieve a complex task. Imagine if you had to go and write your own Google Maps application from scratch. That wouldn't really make sense given that Google Maps is widely adopted. So instead, you'd rather tap into their service and use that existing functionality. Now, while there are some really great benefits and advantages to using web development frameworks, there are also notable disadvantages. The first and most notable of them all is probably that they are prone to major updates. And this is because many companies often develop frameworks. If it's not an organization or a company developing and maintaining a framework, they tend to be open source. But you are prone to these major updates in that if something becomes incompatible with the current version, you will most likely have to upgrade to a newer version. And this might just break a couple of things in your web application. Now, while frameworks offer you more lean code and a smaller code base, it's important to keep in mind that there will often be a learning curve involved. For example, by adopting a web development framework, you might have to learn an adaptation of a programming language like JavaScript, for example. And then lastly, integration is not always guaranteed with every single programming language or software stack, so do keep this in mind as well. Wonderful. Now that we have a fairly basic understanding of what web development frameworks are, we can differentiate between two kinds of frameworks, and that is front-end as well as back-end. So let's take a look at a couple of examples of front-end frameworks. So while we are going to list a couple of frameworks over here, it's important to keep in mind that there are many other frameworks available. The ones that I've decided to list here are the ones that are quite popular among the web development community. First, we have Vue.js, otherwise known as Vue.JavaScript. This is one of the newest web development frameworks in the space, but it has seen rapid adoption among the web development community. With Vue.js, application data is processed in a way that allows the framework to render components almost in real time to the user interface. And this is really powerful if you have changes happening in your backend like a database and you really want those changes to be snappy and quick in the front end. Components in Vue are also small, they are self-contained, and they can be reused throughout the application lifecycle, which means you don't have to build components from scratch every time you're trying to render something to the screen. And this, in my opinion, is quite powerful. The community support is not as wide as other frameworks such as Angular and React, but that is because those two frameworks have been around for a very long time. Although, in my opinion, I do think Vue.js is catching up. Next, we have Angular, as mentioned before. Angular was developed by Google and has seen several updates. It is based on TypeScript, which is an extension of the JavaScript language. So this is what I meant by there being a learning curve in learning a framework in the web development space, in that you'll most likely have to learn TypeScript from scratch. However, if you are familiar with JavaScript, TypeScript is not all that hard to learn. Now remember when I mentioned that frameworks are prone to major updates? Well, Angular is no exception. In 2016, Angular 2 was released. Now, of course, all the developers that were using the initial release of Angular had to eventually migrate to Angular 2, given that there were major updates to the framework. Projects in Angular are structured into modules, components, as well as services, which provide you as a developer with a really tightly knitted package when it comes to the development process. Angular is also a really good framework in the event that app performance or web app performance is going to be a concern. And then last but not least, we also have React. The native framework for web development is called React.js, and React was actually developed by Facebook. React is an excellent framework if you really want to focus on the front end side of things and make your UI look really beautiful. It is often used as a library to render elements. React elements are the smallest building blocks of React applications, more powerful than the DOM model that we've often worked with in HTML. And this allows you to build really fast and responsive user interfaces. React is based on JavaScript, which is really good if you are familiar with JavaScript already, but it's mostly combined with JSX, otherwise known as JavaScript XML, a syntax extension that allows you to create elements from the ground up, but allows you to build these elements in a more efficient way. However, one big downside of React is that you cannot implement the MVC architecture, otherwise known as the Model View Controller architecture. Now, as you can see, there are trade-offs between using these different front-end frameworks, but I do suggest doing your own homework before deciding which one is best for your project. Now, much like we have front-end frameworks that we can use to optimize the user interface of our web application, we also have back-end frameworks that we can use to integrate services such as the use of a database and storage. So what exactly are some of the really great back-end frameworks out there? Let's start off by exploring Firebase, which is a very powerful back-end service. It was developed by Google and it supports an array of platforms. This not only includes web development, but Firebase can also be used for mobile application development and even game development. There are third-party integration services such as Firebase that allows you to build your Python applications on top of a Firebase service. Now, Firebase is hosted on the cloud, which I think is a huge benefit in the event that you don't want to host your own database or back-end service on a local machine. Firebase offers you things such as real-time data storage and even machine learning capabilities. It also scales very easy and it's very affordable for small and medium projects. One other notable feature of Firebase is that you can actually build an unstructured or a NoSQL database in the event that you are trying to manage really large and unstructured data sets. Next up is MongoDB, also very popular. You might have heard of this if you've been looking for an alternative to a SQL database. MongoDB is an open source document database which also supports the JSON format or the NoSQL database architecture, and it's used to manage unstructured data much like Firebase services. This essentially means that MongoDB uses key pair values to query data, and it's really great for large data sets. One other great benefit of MongoDB is that it does also offer you real-time analytics, especially if you want to be able to visualize your data. And lastly, there is also AWS, which was developed by Amazon as a cloud service. Now, Amazon does offer a relational database service, otherwise known as Amazon RDS, and it's a good alternative in the event that you want to host a SQL database on the cloud. The service also supports various popular SQL engines, and this includes MySQL and Oracle, which are SQL engines that are very popular, especially in big corporate companies. Now, with that said, this does bring us to the end of the web development course. You might be asking yourself, what's next? After learning all the skills that you might have picked up in this course, how can you use those skills and how can you grow those skills? The reason I decided to reserve this last lesson for web development frameworks is simply because as you continue to grow your skills as a web developer, at some point you might want to consider picking up a framework. Frameworks are widely adopted by corporate companies and even small and medium-sized business. So it just naturally feels like the next extension as a web developer. Now, understanding HTML, JavaScript, CSS, PHP, and SQL is actually just the start of your career as a web developer. Again, as you progress your skills, you might want to consider picking up a framework so that you can strengthen your employability, and this just improves the likelihood of you finding a suitable career path as a web developer. There are a couple of things that I'd like to mention and a couple of points that you might want to consider. And that is that you should continue to build personal projects here and there just to strengthen your portfolio. Because do keep in mind, when you apply for jobs, having a portfolio as a web developer is a really great advantage. It essentially showcases that you have a very good understanding of web development. And again, this is just going to benefit you in the long run. Now, I really hope that you managed to get the most out of this course and that you've enjoyed this journey with me. I want to wish you all the best with your future career prospects, and I want to encourage you to never stop learning. Until next time, cheers.